thank you. I feel privileged to actually to be here this morning and be able to share a little bit of this confusing health insurance industry. I'm actually dedicating a little bit of this to my mother, who was a two-time cancer survivor. But unfortunately, her heart ended up getting her at some point. But it is near and dear to my heart. In terms of the topics today, I'm going to spend some time talking about the Affordable Care Act and the challenges that we've faced with the Affordable Care Act, a little bit about the potential future of it under now President Donald Trump and the Republican majority, and then talk a little bit about the impact to Mayo Clinic and to our patients as we move forward. So to start with, just to get a little bit of a level playing ground, the Affordable Care Act, the 2010 legislation, really was about reforming the health insurance industry and requiring health insurance coverage for all Americans. The Obamacare component of it really is synonymous with the individual insurance aspect of it that was offered through the public exchange marketplace. So as we talk about the ACA and Obamacare, that's kind of the fundamental components that I'm going to share about. In terms of the problems with the ACA public exchange marketplace that we've experienced over the last couple of years, I think we all realize the premise of insurance is that the lucky subsidize the unfortunate. And a great example of that, if you have a teenager, you know you pay more for auto insurance. And as I've found out, if you have boys, you pay even more. But so that's certainly one of the premises. We have too few healthy people buying policies under the Affordable Care Act, while we have a large majority filing costly claims. So this really kind of boils down to the number one fundamental issue, is that with the public marketplace, we never were able to get the young, healthy adults who need very few services to sign up and purchase the insurance. Insurers' underwriting of the premiums then for the ACA marketplace were too low in the first year, and they've not been able to increase the rates quickly enough to really make it profitable. And I think we all understand that insurance companies are not in the business to lose money, and therefore there's been a lot of upheaval within the market. Some of the key issues with the public exchange has been the mandated essential health benefits, which were more than what many customers perceived they needed, and so they didn't sign up. And that really boiled down to, the legislation basically said, you need to buy a the benefits are going to be at a BMW level, where maybe all we really needed was a Chevy. And so a lot of people were forced to potentially buy a set of benefits that they would never utilize, so they avoided purchasing insurance. However, the ACA did eliminate pre-existing conditions, which was a major positive reform for the industry, but it definitely had a huge impact on the actual underwriting or the pricing of the insurance. As all of a sudden, insurance companies couldn't eliminate people or write premiums based on pre-existing conditions. And the other major big impact was the use of premium subsidies by the federal government, that for those that couldn't afford the insurance, the government provided these subsidies. Over 70% actually of the purchasers on the public marketplace qualified for subsidies, which basically insulated the cost, and therefore that connection between the insurance premium and the services was disrupted. I don't know that this is. All right. So all of these challenges really created a situation then where we had huge losses for the insurers, and the safety net provisions that were part of the ACA did not make up for these losses. In 2015, insurers got only 1.6%, or 96 million, of the $6 billion that the government owed them through the legislation. I don't know, how many of us feel that we could live off of 1.6 of what we earned? And therefore, you can see some of the fundamental issues with the exchange marketplace. And that pretty much immediately led to insurers pulling out of the exchange due to these unsustainable losses. So the net result is that we had many insurers at the national level scaled way back on their individual marketplace plans, or they exited entirely due to these financial losses. The first really free fall, or the beginning of it, was in May of 2016, May of last year, when United Healthcare posted their first quarter losses based on the public exchange business, and they warned back in May that they were probably going to get out of this marketplace in 2017. Shortly thereafter, Aetna announced that they were going to cut back 70% of the counties that they were offering these programs available for. They exited, and it wasn't just the for-profits. Example, Health Services Corp., which runs 5 Blues plans in 5 states, lost $1.5 billion on these individual public marketplace in 2015. So that became very clear, is that this wasn't just a for-profit insurers not making enough money. There were some real fundamental failings in the system. How about here in Arizona? Here in Arizona, United Healthcare, Humana, Aetna, and Health Choice all left the public marketplace in 2017. We started, the second year of the exchange in 2015, there were 12 plans available. This dropped to 8 plans in 2016, and pretty much hit rock bottom this year with only 2 plans in Arizona participating, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona and Centene. In Pima County, as an example, there were only, Pima County is the only county in Arizona this year that had 2 choices. They actually had one county where you could pick between the 2. Every other county in Arizona basically had one provider, one health insurance provider. That's not much choice. And there's not much further you can go than from 1 to 0 in terms of being able to offer, still provide the insurance. And while this was all happening, average rate increases from 2016 to 2017 were 51% for Blue Cross Blue Shield and just less than 75% for Centene. All of this really points out that we had a very unstable marketplace model, and that there were going to have to be some significant changes to the Affordable Care Act. So what's the future of the Affordable Care Act under the ACA, or under the new Trump administration? Well, during the campaign, one of his quotes was that I will ask Congress to convene a special session so we can repeal and replace. And he added, and it will be such an honor for me, for you, and for everybody in this country, because Obamacare has to be replaced. Well, that's a pretty clear agenda. In terms of the new administration and the fact that we are in for a bit of a rocky road, and that we're going to see significant changes. The most likely outcome is going to be a repeal and replace of the ACA. Again, given the Trump administration and the Republican control of the House and the Senate. Under this repeal and replace, Republicans only need 51 Senate votes to be able to repeal Obamacare through a process called budget reconciliation. But through that, they can only eliminate those components that are actually tied to federal spending. So a couple of examples of that. components are the Medicaid expansion. They can basically, through that budget reconciliation process, no longer provide the states with funds for Medicaid expansion. That alone would affect over 9 million enrollees or beneficiaries. They can immediately suspend the premium subsidies that we talked about that people were getting to buy the insurance. Two of the things that they really cannot just toss out as part of the budget reconciliation is the ban on pre-existing conditions. And there has been a lot of bipartisan agreement that they want to keep the provision that allows young adults to stay on their parents' insurance until the age of 26. These are two really important bipartisan reforms that, that we achieved through the ACA that will be critical to try to maintain. What is the future? Let's see, the other thing the federal government has done is that's going to impact the approach to repeal and replace is that the federal government has never undone a major benefits program after it has taken effect. And neither the Trump administration nor the GOP lawmakers know exactly how to replace it. So that really is the political pressure point here. Is if the ACA is going to be repealed, there has to be a plan about how to replace it. The final numbers of enrollment for 2017 this year jumped from over 20 million to 22.8 million Americans that have coverage through the ACA. And that's a lot of people to disrupt their health insurance coverage. So the challenge for the Trump administration and the Republican majority is going to be what's the plan? How are they going to replace this? Just in terms of more on the other insurance or traditional health insurance from an employer perspective, some of the things that the Trump administration has endorsed through their plan is changing the tax code to allow individuals to fully deduct health insurance, allowing insurance plans to be sold across state lines, and ensuring price transparency. All of these really are themes about market competition versus government regulation. So we can absolutely expect more privatization within the health insurance industry. So just a little bit then on the Gallup. There was a Gallup poll done in November in terms of what this all means to patients and what people want in terms of changes to the ACA. And they showed that 53% disapproved, 42% approved, but they felt major changes were needed. Well, we're going to get those changes. But in terms of what that means to Mayo Clinic and our patients is very interesting, that Dr. Noseworthy, our president and CEO of Mayo Clinic, met with then President-elect Donald Trump with 4 other healthcare executives. And according to Dr. Noseworthy, the invitation from Trump was to share his perspective on the future state of healthcare delivery, research, and excellence. And that he was pleased for the opportunity to be able to meet with the then president-elect. Dr. Noseworthy went on and is recognized across the industry as an articulate commentator on healthcare reform and was able to share specific ideas with President Trump on how to make the ACA better. And he basically correctly made the strong point that Obamacare was basically expanded insurance coverage, but it did not emphasize patient health. And that one of the unintended consequences of the ACA is that it limited patient choice with physicians and put more barriers between our patients and physicians. That was the whole rise of narrow networks where the insurance companies basically started telling patients where they could go and what doctors they could see. So we're looking to have some emphasis in trying to turn back that trend. A quick note, Dr. Price, who is President Trump's appointee for the Secretary of Health and Human Services, has gone on record basically saying that he sees his #1 issue is to let physicians and patients drive healthcare decision-making and to get regulation out of the physician's office. So to end, Dr. Noseworthy, after meeting with President Trump and the other healthcare leaders, quoted, said, "Personally, this is me speaking, but we're basically optimistic that we can create a better system together. And that's our silver lining. That's our glass is more than half full. And that to let you know that Mayo Clinic is still committed to our #1 objective, and that is to meet the needs of our patients come first. And that we will work with the new administration and Congress to ensure and enhance the ability to make sure that our patients can continue to come to Mayo Clinic going forward."
Good morning. I've been doing this for a couple years, and I just want to say what an honor and a privilege it is, and a big shout out to Dr. Mesa and all my incredibly amazing Mayo Clinic colleagues that make this event happen every year. And then I also want to thank the PowerPoint gods for assigning the Affordable Care Act to Mark and not me, especially the day after the election, the inauguration of President Trump. And then this morning for you, I have 3 key messages. The first message is, do like Tom Brokaw. The second message is to choose the right fruit. And the third message is to know your rights. And I promise I will tie all of those together. So message number 1. Okay. This should start somehow. No? Okay, could someone I don't know. Okay. Can someone from the IT sort of get this started for me? Okay. All right. Is there a way to play this? If not, I'll just go ahead. Okay. Okay, well, I encourage all of you when you go home to go to the TED Talks and listen to this TED Talk conversation between Tom Brokaw and his daughter, Jennifer Brokaw, who's an emergency room physician. And it's a very heartfelt conversation between the two of them where Tom Brokaw talks with her about he has an advance directive, but he's never really communicated it to her. And really, the advance directive is an expression of exactly what sort of end-of-life care Tom Brokaw wants. And so I would strongly encourage you all to go home, listen to this tape, and then have that heartfelt conversation with your family members about what do you want your final days to look like? What sort of medical care and treatment do you want at the end of life? Do you want to be on a ventilator? Do you want to be on a respirator? Do you want to die in a hospital or at home? All of those things can be expressed in a living will. And so The next message is choose the right fruit. So here's the cartoon, and it's a fruit vendor with a sign that says, "An apple a day will keep the doctor away." And the customer says, "Well, could you recommend a fruit that works for lawyers?" Well, the proverbial fruit that works with lawyers and the healthcare decision-making world is an advance directive. If you have an advance directive, you're going to minimize having lawyers involved in the healthcare decision-making process. In Arizona, there are 4 types of advance directives: a living will, a healthcare power of attorney, a mental health care power of attorney, and a pre-hospital medical care directive. Now, the first one is a living will. And a living will is a legal document that provides specific instructions from you to your family members and your healthcare providers that outlines exactly what type of care you want or don't want at the end of life when you're no longer able to communicate. They're very simple to complete. These are essentially the elements of that. It's a written document signed by a competent adult that clearly states that it's your advance directive and the instructions that you want. It must be witnessed. It does not need to be notarized. And if you're going to use a family member, or really if it's one witness, as a lawyer, we recommend that you have 2 witnesses just in the event that one of the witnesses is determined to be ineligible. Well, the next type of advance directive is a healthcare power of attorney. A healthcare power of attorney is the appointment of someone else to make medical decisions for you in the event that you're physically or mentally unable to provide your wishes. It's the appointment of someone else as opposed to an expression of your decisions about healthcare. It essentially empowers somebody else to make all of your medical decisions for you. And like living wills, it's a very easy document to complete. These are the essential requirements. 1, the person that you appoint must be an adult, must be over the age of 18. It must be signed and dated. It can be notarized or witnessed. And if it's witnessed, then the witness must attest that you are of sound mind and are preparing the document without duress or under undue influence. And if there's only one witness, then that witness cannot be a beneficiary under your will or your estate. In addition, a healthcare power of attorney can include other items such as organ donation, whether or not you agree to an autopsy, and oftentimes living wills and healthcare power of attorney are included in the same document, which is perfectly acceptable. 2 other types of advance directives recognized in Arizona are the mental health care power of attorney and the pre-hospital medical care directive. In Arizona, a healthcare power of attorney does not have the legal authority to consent to admission to a psychiatric inpatient facility. In Arizona, only an individual or a court order or a mental health care power of attorney have the authority to consent to psychiatric inpatient admission. So if the patient, for a patient with Alzheimer's, in that instance, it's advisable to have not only a medical power of attorney, but also a mental health care power of attorney. And then the 4th type is the pre-hospital medical care directive. Oftentimes, when you're dealing with terminally ill patients, you want to avoid a situation where emergency medical providers are administering CPR against the individual's wishes. So in Arizona, there is this pre-hospital medical care directive that provides directions to emergency medical providers not to administer CPR. In Arizona, there are very specific requirements, one of which is that you must use the form that's approved by the state of Arizona, which is an orange form. Oftentimes, you'll hear this document referred to as an orange form. The form actually requires that there be very specific instructions in the completion, which include a detailed description of the individual or a picture. It must be signed by the patient and witnessed, and it must also include a statement from the healthcare provider that certifies that the individual has been advised by their physician that failure to administer CPR can result in death. What if you change your mind? You had an advance directive, you appointed a family member, and now you've changed your mind. It's very easy to revoke. You simply say, I revoke. It can be done orally. There's not a lot of work that needs to go into that. As a lawyer, of course, we would recommend that you put any revocation in writing so there's documentation of it, but it's not legally required. I've provided in my PowerPoint presentation a number of great resources on advance directives. So when you actually can watch the power of the TED Talk with Tom Brokaw, I would recommend watching that and then use these resources to actually prepare your advance directive. So resources are available through Mayo Clinic, through the American Bar Association, and the Secretary of State's office in Arizona also has some great resources. So what happens if you don't have advance directives? So this is the situation where you did not pick the proverbial fruit, and lawyers most likely will be involved. If you don't have an advance directive, then the law steps in and decides who's going to make the medical decisions on your behalf. And in Arizona, there's a statutory hierarchy, which means if you are unable to give consent, then they look to a spouse. If there's no spouse, then to adult children. If no adult children, then parents. If no parents, then domestic partner. If no domestic partner, then siblings. And then if no siblings, then a close personal friend. And this sounds very orderly, but I can tell you as a healthcare lawyer for Mayo Clinic, this is where lawyers get involved, because oftentimes there may be a number of adult children and they all don't agree. Or there may be a situation where there are parents and adult children, both alive, that don't agree about health care. And there's no better illustration of this than, I don't know if any of you remember the Terry Schiavo case, but in that case, the parents and the husband were locked in a legal battle for over 2 years. I think there were probably over 100 pleadings filed in that case. So clearly, they did not pick the right fruit. The third message today is to know your rights. So oftentimes people who are undergoing cancer treatment or are returning to work after cancer treatment may encounter either obvious or subtle forms of discrimination in the workplace. Colleagues or supervisors may incorrectly assume that they're not capable of completely performing their job to company expectations, which can mean that they get passed over for promotions or career opportunities, or even in worst case, may be demoted. So there are some federal laws that provide protection against discrimination, one of which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits all forms of discrimination related to disability, whether it's a perceived disability or a history of a disability. The law also requires that employers make reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with disabilities, and these reasonable accommodations may be allowing reasonable time off to go to medical appointments or physical changes in the work environment. Employers must treat their employees all fairly and equally, and they cannot ask their employees personal questions about their medical treatment unless they are specifically job-related medical questions. And the ADA also protects individuals who have family members who have a disability. Another federal law that provides protection is the Family Medical Leave Act, which protects employees who need to take leave either because they are ill or they're taking care of a family member with an illness. The law requires that employers give a minimum of 2 weeks, 12 weeks of unpaid leave, and their benefits must continue during those 12 weeks. And then employees are not required to take unpaid leave if they have vacation or sick leave time accrued. There are some limitations with the Family Medical Leave Act, and that is that it only applies to employers that have 50 or more employees. And it also provides that after the 12 weeks of unpaid leave have been exhausted, that the employer is no longer required to keep that position open. Then a third federal law that provides protection is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which basically protects against medical-related disability when it comes to genetic testing. Employers cannot hire, fire, or make hiring decisions based on a person's genetic information. Employers cannot require or obtain genetic information about their employees or their employee's family. And insurers cannot request or demand genetic information, and they cannot use genetic information to determine eligibility or premium costs. So, here are some recommendations. If you believe that you've been discriminated, we recommend that you first talk with your employer, their HR department, see if there are some reasonable accommodations that can be made. And then if you do believe that you are experiencing job-related discrimination, keep a detailed record, making notes of what occurred, who was involved when it happened. And then, in the end, consult with a lawyer if you believe that you have a legal claim. And then lastly, to tie up my 3 points, 1, go home, watch the TED Talk, and do like Tom Brokaw. 3, pick the right fruit. 2, pick the right fruit. 3, know your rights. And then hopefully if you do all these things, you'll only need us to help you read the fine print. Thank you.